Okay, gentlemen, as you're getting seated there, I'll review the rules. I've got to go back to my first debate rules. There will be 9 questions by coin toss earlier. It has been determined that Mr. Coulson will take the first question. The first question will just be a 2-minute response with no rebuttal. The 8 questions thereafter, you will each have an opportunity alternatively, reciprocally, to answer those questions in a 90-second period, and then you each have a 30-second follow-up. Again, gentlemen, congratulations on your candidacy. Mr. Coulson, by coin toss, you get the first question. You'll have 2 minutes, sir, to comment on the following. That's a general introduction of yourself, a statement of your qualifications, why you wish to be the state representative for the 78th district. Thank you, sir.
Hey y'all, thank you. I'm Greg. I'm running for state representative, and they put us at the end, so I hope y'all ate supper before you came, and we're not losing anyone tonight. I told my brother, I want to say thank you to the Tea Party. I told my brother I was coming to a Tea Party debate, and my brother's a very thoughtful person. He said, Greg, don't they hate Democrats? I said, no. I said, the Tea Party is about some very core things. They believe in a fair tax system. They believe in a transparent government. And they believe in a business-friendly tax environment. And I said, Danny, I'm going to be the candidate in this race who can fulfill those things. Because I'm the only candidate in this race who has started and built a business and felt that crushing pain of writing the IRS in the state of Kentucky a check when I could buy a new truck. And I know what it's like to pay $800 a month in health insurance. I'm the only candidate in this race who has constantly fought government overreach, even against Doug here, so we get along outside of it, and really stood up for people when the government is trying to take action against them. And as far as taxes, I'm the only candidate in this race who didn't go into a back room and impose 41 new taxes on working people and poor people and retirees and small business owners after telling everybody that it was done. I am committed to serving this district. I stood in Frankfurt with Bob Gregg and Laura Gregg and Juanita and Mary June as we fought for the education system in Kentucky. And I'm not going to stop there. And I'm so grateful for y'all having me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes for your introduction, statement of qualifications, and why you want to keep going to Frankfurt, sir.
I don't want to keep going to Frankfurt because I enjoy serving the people of the 78th House District. For the ones of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Hart. I'm the current state representative. And, you know, some of the qualifications I bring to the table, before I was elected in 2016, I spent 13 years in local government. Although it's been pointed out that I do not run a small business, but I have been involved in legislation that affects local economies and local communities for the 12 years that I spent on 8 years as a city council member, 4 years as mayor. In the 4 years I was mayor, I ran the city. I had 20-some employees underneath of me. So I know what although it was a government entity, I do know what it's like to manage people, manage budgets, and I feel like I bring that experience to Frankfurt. Something else that I bring to Frankfurt with my experience is I worked over 18 years with the Lexington Fayetteville County government and emergency services, so I can bring a retrospect of what small town America and what big city America is alike, and I can use my experiences from both to further benefit the Commonwealth of Kentucky and to move us forward. And I hope to get the opportunity in November to go back to Frankfurt and continue some of the things that I've started. It's been repeatedly said, and we've been repeatedly criticized for the way that the pension bill was passed. The process that passed the pension bill has been used since 1955. If that process is now ruled unconstitutional, the framework of what we have started and we operate under in this state is going to be severely jeopardized. But we didn't do anything secretive. We announced it as soon as we come in. The bill that we passed was versions of Senate Bill 1 that we had our actuarial analysis and our financial impact statements on. So it wasn't, although the perception is out there that we did it behind closed doors, we did it at the last minute because we argued up until the last minute to accomplish what we set out to do, and that was to create a solvent pension
Thank you, Mr. Hart. You each will have 90 seconds to respond to each question and then a 30-second rebuttal, just as we did for the mayoral candidates earlier. Mr. Hart, this question is for you, sir. Several states have enacted laws that require voter approval to raise any state, local, or school tax. This would effectively repeal the law allowing automatic tax increases without voter approval. What is your position on this matter, and would you support such a law, sir?
I'm open to any new legislation that can better modernize or continue to modernize our tax code. I think the specific law that we're referring to is House Bill 44, which was enacted in 1979, which allows your local governments to take up to a 4% tax increase. Anything above that would go to a vote of the people. I do think that it's something that needs to be looked at. I'm certainly open to looking at that issue and discussing it, specifically or especially because we're moving forward with modernizing our tax form, simplifying and making it better. But I do caution everybody as we move forward. We need to look at the legislation specifically without looking at how the legislation is written and how the financial impact will be on this Commonwealth. It's hard to say whether I would vote for or against a specific piece of legislation, but as far as the idea and the notion of addressing that law and changing it, I am support and open to exploring that, and if we could come up with a better way to do it, I'm all for it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Coulson?
I remember.
Your position on requiring voter approval to raise any tax.
All right, I'm going to answer your question.
You may do so, sir. It's your option, gentlemen, if you want to sit there or...
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Either way.
What you're talking about is not the 1979 law that deals with the imposition of school taxes, which requires it to go to a ballot measure if it's above 4%, which is why everyone complains about the 4% every year. What we're talking about is any time there's a change in the tax code, putting it on the ballot. Usually, I'm a big fan of ballot measures. We saw in Missouri, when they put it on the ballot, they repealed the right to work law. And so I think it's really good, typically, to have that. My problem here with this, and probably why I would end up opposing it, is twofold. The first thing is the legislature has to be able to react, okay? And so when the legislature is dealing with new economic conditions as they come down, remember in 2008 we dealt with that collapse, they got to be able to adjust on the spot, okay? Now, not saying that people aren't accountable, but the legislature needs to be able to do that, and then there's a democratic process for correcting that when you disagree with what they've done. The second thing is the influx of PAC money and special interest money. Ever since Citizens United, we've had unaccountable large sums of money being spent on ballot initiatives. And so we have one side that's super well funded that may be against the will of the people who never get to hear that other side. So I would oppose that legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Coulson. Mr. Hart, 30 more seconds if you wish, sir, on the issue of requiring voter approval for the tax.
I would just like to point out, I believe the question dealt with how local governments can raise taxes, and that is House Bill 44 that was passed in 1979. It's not just school boards. All local governments can take up to a 4% tax increase when setting their tax code each year, and if it goes over 4%, it has to go to a vote of the people.
Mr. Coulson, same issue, 30 seconds more if you wish, sir.
The questions are written down in front of us, and if the moderator wants to repeat it, question.
Several states have elected laws that require voter approval to raise any state, local, or school tax. This would effectively repeal laws allowing automatic tax increases without voter approval. Your position on that, sir?
I stand by my answer from earlier.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Mr. Coulson, this next question goes to you first. And by the way, I didn't mean to confuse you, gentlemen, earlier. You may sit at the microphone and answer the questions if you wish. I understand. Okay. All right, Mr. Coulson, 90 seconds. Kentucky has been said falls behind neighboring states in its individual and corporate tax structure. Other states have no income tax or limited income tax and rely primarily on a consumption tax and a business-friendly corporate tax structure. What is your position on individual and corporate tax reform?
It certainly needs to be undertaken, and the question kind of leads you to believe that we're behind because it's higher than the states around us and that they're doing consumption taxes. I'm very opposed to consumption taxes. Consumption taxes unfairly target working people, poor people, and retired people. Because if you imagine a family making $30,000 a year and a family that's making $100,000 a year, they're going to buy their kids new sneakers for school. Both of those families are going to pay the same number of dollars in taxes, and so that family making $100,000 is paying a much lower rate than the family that's making $30,000. And so this is a very unfair and regressive way to run a tax system. I believe that we should have a well-ordered income tax system that takes into account a corporation's profits or a family's income, what their liabilities are, and spreads that equally across the board. If you look at the tax reform from last year, I'm a small business owner, I buy my health care on the market. I used to be able to deduct that cost. This year, I will have to pay taxes on $10,000 worth of medical premiums, insurance premiums. That is not helpful to the small business owner. We're a two-man shop, and that's going to hurt.
Mr. Hart, your position on individual and corporate tax reform, sir?
Well, I'm in favor of moving to a consumption-based tax and moving away from a production-based tax. Production-based tax taxes people's income. I think people should be allowed to keep the money they earn. The tax reform that we worked on and we passed this past session, we had 3 goals in mind. One was to decrease the income tax and move it to a zero income tax. And the other was to simplify the tax code and transition to a system that creates jobs and economic growth. Kentucky has an individual income tax credit that relieves the burden on lower income households. The family size tax credit means that those federal property level, those below the federal poverty level or just above it, have all or most of their income tax liability offset. Our tax code this session moved everyone above the poverty level that would normally have a 5.8 or 6% tax rate to a flat 5% tax rate. This is allowing them to keep more of their money, and as we move forward, we're going to be able to eliminate the income tax, but we're going to be raising taxes on services. But as we raise taxes on services, we're going to be bringing our economy is more of a service-based economy anyways. Well, that's going to help bring it all in, and we should find more revenue, better revenue, and be able to fund things like education, pensions, and the needs for the citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Coulson, 30 seconds more on tax reform if you wish, sir.
I've got a lot there. First off, I don't think that's an accurate representation of what happened to the income tax, because there were introductory marginal rates, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.8, and 6%, okay? Those were raised on everybody, up to that 5% mark. The cuts only happened once you hit that $75,000 mark. So you had to be in the top double the median income in Harrison County in order to benefit from that. Second, I was on top.
Mr. Hart, 30 seconds more on tax reform if you wish, sir.
No, I'd just like to point out, as we move forward with what we did this session was the first step. There's more to come. It needs to be further looked at, but as we continue to raise service taxes, which we will, we are going to lower your income tax. And the ultimate goal is to get rid of your income tax so that we have a tax code that's similar to Tennessee and Texas, who have consistently shown more revenue for their state and their citizens.
Okay. Mr. Hart, we'll stay with you for the next question, which is, do you agree that state government should be more accountable for the taxpayer money that is spent? If so, what proposal do you have for more accountability? If not, what lesser degree of accountability would you advocate?
No, I agree there needs to be as much accountability as we can put in place when spending taxpayer dollars. Some of the things that I supported and voted for this past session, like with our budget, we cut spending 6% across the board to every department in the state. That is allowed us to help find some revenue. That, along with our revenue bill that we passed, we were able to put money back into some of the more needed areas of our budget, like seat funding and transportation funding for schools and that. And as we continue to move forward, we need to be constantly concerned about where our tax money is going. And one of the things that we need to do, we need to prioritize where we're spending it, just like with the pension. Our pension unfunded liability was our #1 priority with this budget, and you can see by the level that we funded the budget of what we were able to accomplish. So we need just to be good stewards, have fiscal responsibility, make fiscally responsible decisions with the tax dollars as we move forward, and I pledge to continue to do that.
Mr. Coulson, accountability to the taxpayer, do we need more or less, and how would you effectuate it?
We absolutely need more, and the best form of accountability is transparency. When we send out open records requests under the court, Kentucky Open Records Act, and those sorts of things, and then have to litigate them in Franklin Circuit Court, it's not very transparent. And I proposed something a few months ago after we had that last day of session issue, and I proposed a rule change which several of my other candidates have joined, which is a requirement that a bill has to be public for at least 5 days before we will vote on it. And the first time I talked about that, it got an applause, and I was surprised. Because if you're talking about legislation that impacts every single person in this Commonwealth, and 5 days is something you clap for, we've set the bar really low. We've got to make sure that the public knows what we're doing up there, and we're not just doing what we want under the cover of night, and then hoping that we can weather the backlash after it happens. Accountability starts at the top.
Oh, I agree that accountability starts at the top, but you know, we're being consistently criticized for the method that bill was passed, and that process, like I mentioned earlier, it began in 1955, and we need to be cognizant of the fact we didn't change the rules when the Republicans gained the majority. We're using the rules that were already set there, so we didn't do anything in the cover of darkness. We followed the processes that were set forth, and we passed the bill. And as soon as we passed the bill, we brought it out to everybody.
Mr. Coulson, another half-minute on taxpayer accountability, if you wish, sir.
I don't care if Abraham Lincoln passed a bill that way. It wasn't right and folks were mad about it. And here's the deal. I've never run for office before. I may win or lose this time, and then I may lose next time. But I got to be able to look my community in the eye afterwards and not have them feel like I pulled the rug out from under them. Not look at Mr. Gregg sitting there and saying that I passed legislation that affected your profession and I didn't tell anyone it was coming. In fact, I told you Senate Bill 1 was dead and I wouldn't vote for it. And then when no one was looking, go ahead and do it.
Okay, Mr. Coulson, we'll start with you with the next question. Many people believe there is too much government, too many unnecessary regulations, and too much red tape. Do you agree? If so, what action would you take to reduce the size of government, repeal unnecessary regulation, and cut red tape? If not, what additional oversights would you favor?
It's funny, all my examples come out of Pendleton County for this one. And there's a woman there who has a couple of restaurants that she just opened a bed and breakfast, and she's almost 100% not going to vote for me. But she has some great ideas, and so I hope she's listening. Her son remodeled a building down there, and he wants to move into it. And he can't unless he pays a bunch of money for inspections and engineers. Downtown Falmouth is struggling so hard for development right now. And the fact that a guy put his money into a business, into a place to live in an area that has empty buildings around, it sounds like a great song.
Sorry about that. We'll give you an extra time, sir.
Yes.
You're like the official that run the clock back. You set the clock to, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. So that's nuts, and we've got to get out of the way. When folks are looking at economically depressed areas and they're ready to put their dollars into an area, we got to get the heck out of the way, guys. The second thing is that Falmouth is really experiencing difficulty with the cost of flood insurance. People can't afford to finance property down there because of the cost of flood insurance that's there in that floodplain. And so I was talking to a friend today who works in that flood insurance program, and he said, Greg, you know, they can do group policies, and it'll only cover $33,000 to $40,000 worth of damage, but 99% of all flood damage is under that level, and it would cost them 1/3 to 1/4 of what they're paying now. And so I was really excited to hear that. I literally heard about that. Stop.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coulson. Mr. Hart, big government, regulations, red tape, too much, too little? What do you do?
I definitely think we have too much, and I'm very supportive of several, actually a lot of the red tape reduction initiatives being done in the state of Kentucky right now. We need to stop duplicating services in some of our departments and multiple departments. And as in response to that, in 2017, I sponsored and passed a bill into law, House Bill 453, which created the Kentucky Claims Commission. And basically what my bill did, it was a simple bill that combined the Board of Claims, the Kentucky Board of Tax Appeals, and the Crime Victims Compensation Board into one board. We reduced 3 boards into one. That's saving the taxpayers money, is preventing duplication of efforts by various boards. And as I continue to serve in this capacity, I will continue to promote legislation that helps reduce big government and create less government for our people.
Mr. Coulson, 30 seconds more on the same subject, if you wish, sir.
Yeah, I think everybody's on board with efficiency, and so long as that we're providing good services and effective services that are necessary to the preservation of the society that we've built, as long as we can be as efficient about it as possible, I think this is something that every public servant is going to pursue.
Mr. Hart, 30 seconds on the same subject.
No, this is an area where I'm going to agree, because we do need to reduce our path and our imprint on what we're doing, and we've got a lot of duplication in our services, and I think we need to move forward. And some of the regulations he talked about with the flood control issues and the building inspectors, they need to definitely be looked at.
Okay, Mr. Hart, next question. Unfunded pension liability for state workers and teachers continues to be a major problem. In 2017, Kentucky ranked 50th out of 50 states and has a very large deficiency. This is affecting the state's credit rating and ability to attract new industry. Improvements were recently made by the 2017 legislature, yet many citizens do not believe that the legislature has resolved this problem. If you're re-elected, how would you propose to resolve these issues, sir?
Well, the pension liability issues, it all began and it all was created by physically irresponsible policies and practices from past administrations. As I've shown with my votes in this past session, and as we move forward, I vow to everybody that in pledge that I will continue to work towards fiscally responsible policies and legislation that helps bring down the pension liability. This is the first budget in over a decade that the pension fund was fully funded. This is the only budget that I've ever voted for up to now. And as I continue to serve in this capacity, I will continue to vote for budgets that fully fund the pension. We funded the pension at $3.3 billion. It hasn't happened in a long, long time. And that was due to fiscally irresponsible actions. And as we move forward, we need to bring fiscal responsibility in here. We need to pay our bills. And we need to make sure that all of our retirees, teachers, state workers, whoever it may be, earns and receives the pension that they do earn. So I pledge to continue to vote for budgets and policies that bring it down and continue to pay down our pension.
In general, I'll reread some of these longer questions again if you wish to, but basically, Mr. Coulson, 2 minutes to address the unfunded pension liability for our state workers and teachers.
Okay. So let's start where we agree, which is we didn't pay our bills like we should have, and we've learned a very painful lesson because of it. And I hate to go back to things that we disagree with all the time, But the method of passing this legislation that created a new and different kind of pension system shows why we shouldn't have such a lack of transparency. Because no fiscal note was required, or was accompanied with it that was required. It was done after the fact, and after the fact it only shows that the taxpayers, not the government, the taxpayers are only saving $41 million over a 30-year period. That's their numbers. The independent numbers from the Kentucky Center of Economic Policy show that the taxpayers are paying an extra $5 billion over that same period. We don't have to just go by the projections. We can look at what's happened in other states. West Virginia, Alaska, and Michigan have tried this cash hybrid balance system. They found that it provided less security in retirement and cost the taxpayers more. We are literally going to be paying more money for less. Let me say something very clear. The defined benefit pension system works so long as we are faithful stewards of it. So long as that every single budget, when it comes time to pay those bills, and I know things get tight, that has to be one of the things that we fund. But we have to also follow the best financial practices and protect our taxpayers from spending money that they don't need to spend for less. This current system promises no better than a 0% return. That's no promise at all. We have to do better.
Mr. Hart? I'm sorry, Mr. Hart.
That's fine.
30 seconds more on the pension.
I would like to point out, I'm not going to try to debate the numbers because I haven't seen the numbers that he's quoting, but I will make one point, and I hope everybody listens to this. The party that my opponent represents was the party that chose to be physically irresponsible with our taxpayer dollars and that put our pension in the crisis it's in. The party that I represent, being in the majority now, we tried to address that issue. All of our processes weren't perfect, but at the end of the day, we put $3.3 billion back in the pensions, we funded it, and we made it so.
Mr. Coulson, 30 seconds more on pension.
Well, it's easy to play the party politics line where we blame somebody who's never run for office and isn't a career politician for the sins of their party. However, dead Democrats of days gone by aren't at this podium. I am. And I'm going to tell you that I'm committed to fiscal responsibility, as I have been for the last year when I was up in Frankfurt fighting with the teachers for this system. And the reason that those numbers aren't coming out is because they're inconvenient and they show that taxpayers got taken for a ride.
Okay, gentlemen, the next question, question 7, in fact, Mr. Coulson, we'll start with you. This is a bit more lengthy than the other questions, so I'll try to read it as clearly as I can here. A lack of parity in wages and benefits between public and private workers has been stated in the past as a reason for increasing public workers' wages and maintaining generous pension plans. Currently, public sector employee wages and benefits far surpass those paid in small and medium-sized businesses and the private sector. Many of these businesses are unable to compete with the public sector in wages and benefits, thus causing significant economic hardship on those businesses. Since these businesses pay a major portion of the state taxes, do you agree that it is time to check and rebalance public sector wages and benefits to be more in line with both small and medium-sized businesses? If not, why not? Mr. Coulson.
All right, well, the premise of that question is false. I checked my phone a minute ago, not to be rude, but because I texted Judge Barnett, Alex Barnett, to find out what a guy going to work at the road department makes, and it's $10 an hour. Now, if you think that a guy out there in the heat, paving roads, digging tree stumps out of rivers, and doing all that work is making too much money, then I disagree with your priorities. The truth is that public service jobs pay less than their public service counterparts, and I know this from personal experience, because I started my career as a public defender representing poor people who couldn't afford an attorney. And we moved to Owensboro, Kentucky, and I was making $29,000 or $30,000 a year, and we were eating a whole lot of peanut butter and spaghetti and jarred pasta. because we didn't make much money. And I saw my buddies from law school going out and they had nice cars and, you know, those 4-bedroom houses that everybody wants, and they were doing fine, but we believed in what we were doing. The truth is, public service doesn't pay well, and when you take the education levels of a public service employee versus a private employee, the public service employee always makes less, and that's why we keep these benefits in place so that we can retain qualified people without having to double their salary.
Mr. Hart, I'll read it again if you wish, sir, but basically, if you would address parity in wages and benefits between public employees and private workers.
Okay. I support good wages for everyone. I think we need to build legislation and pass policies, like I've said, and I'm going to repeat again. Our policies and our legislation need to be fiscally responsible. They need to be fiscally responsible to the point that we're developing job growth and sound economic policies that will allow our small businesses and medium-sized businesses to prosper. So, by passage of some of the pro-business legislation we did over the last 2 sessions, we have been able to spur our economy to where we have the lowest unemployment rating in the history of Kentucky now. We've got better job training with our community college system. We developed the work skills and work skills-ready institutes to where we're providing better jobs training and training that will allow people to find better jobs and get better wages. And the legislation and the direction that we're going with the Work Skills Initiative and stuff like that, it is working because in the last quarter, Kentucky now has the third, we now have the 3rd highest growth in wages in the United States within this, and it just came out this last quarter with some of our data we received from the federal government. So as you look at that stuff and you see how this is affecting our local businesses and stuff, we're creating more jobs, we're allowing them to make more money and get better wages.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Coulson. 30 seconds more, sir, on public and private wage parity.
I've been very happy to see Kentucky benefit from the national recovery that's been going on for the last few years. My concern is, however, that those jobs that we're seeing aren't jobs that can sustain people. Kentucky has double the number of minimum wage jobs as the national average. Nobody can survive on $200 a week. And so it's the taxpayer that ends up footing the bill. And then that taxpayer just had a bunch of new taxes put on them, so they're making even less. So.
Okay, Mr. Hart, 30 seconds more on parity.
I would just like to point out, you know, philosophically and ideology tells me, and I follow this idea to framework. We need to keep the small businesses, and our economy and capitalism works better when the government is left out of it. So we need to allow our businesses to determine what they pay their employees. Because, you know, if you don't like where you're working, there's nothing that says you have to continue to work.
Okay, gentlemen, for our 8th question, we start out with Mr. Hart. A question similar, if not exactly the same as one of our mayor candidates fielded earlier tonight. What is your position, Mr. Hart, on term limits for all state and local elected offices?
I'm not opposed to term limits. I think in some instances where we've seen career politicians, especially on the federal level, and some on the state level that's been there 30 years or so, you know, that's a little ridiculous because without change in our elected representation, we hit the status quo and we don't get anything accomplished. But I caution with saying that I support term limits, and I do. What I am cautious about, if we ever pass legislation to provide term limits for my office and various local government offices, we want to make sure that the legislation is crafted and written so that the voter does not lose the power and the authority that's given to them by our Constitution to elect our representatives. And, you know, by allowing them to do that, we give them the power of who's in office. But I will say one thing, one way that we could address some of the issues with people staying in office all these years is let's address put limits on the money spent on campaigns. Because right now, the people, it's not as much the person getting elected on his merits, it's the person getting elected that can put out the best marketing campaign for himself.
Thank you. Mr. Coulson, what do you think of term limits, sir?
Well, I got to start with what we agree on there, which is campaign finance, because we see money bombs get dropped in these local races here, and out-of-state PACs and out-of-state millionaires sending in checks, while we're sitting here trying to talk in Pendleton, Harrison, and Scott County to individuals. So we're 100% on board with that, and anytime that we can do that, we're happy to do it. I agree with Mark that we're excited for change, and we think that change should happen. And obviously, I think that it should happen in this race, or I wouldn't be running. But yeah, I'm 100% on board with term limits. In fact, Dean Scamore out of Hardinsburg pre-filed a term limits bill, and I'm going to be all over that. And one of the things that somebody pointed out to me this week, and I hate to talk about federal politics because it's a mess, but all this stuff going on with Judge Kavanaugh. And he said, those senators that are up there right now were senators when Robert Bork was going through his confirmation hearings. 33 years, and we've got the same folks up there, and you're telling me that there's nobody in their district who has a new idea or a better plan or a fresh take on the economy? It's nuts. So yeah, we've got to have the term limits, and we've got to see that turned over quick.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Hart, anything further on term limits, sir?
No, I think we agree on this subject.
Mr. Coulson, anything further on term limits?
I'm not going to talk away from an agreement.
Okay, gentlemen, yeah, let's keep it where it's at. Okay, gentlemen, this is our last question of the evening, and it involves our Second Amendment constitutional rights. Many Kentuckians feel that their Second Amendment rights should not be infringed by state, city, or county regulations. Do you agree? If so, what measures should be taken to make sure that those rights are not compromised? If you do not agree, what additional regulations would you support? And we start with you, Mr. Coulson, on this one.
Yeah, so this is where they try and put the devil horns on you for being a Democrat, and fortunately, I'm a lifelong Second Amendment guy. I'll be blunt, I own an AR-15, I own an AK-47, I've got all the guns that people probably, there are people out there who don't like. But I think as a constitutional purist like myself, somebody who really deals with the Constitution every day, we have to be as excited and we have to be as vigilant about the Second Amendment as we are about the other ones. Because nobody would argue that the Fourth Amendment doesn't cover a cell phone or a car. But there are some people who would say, well, it only covers a muscle. Well, that's crazy talk, We've got to read the Constitution in a way that maximizes individual liberties. And if you look at the Second Amendment, the prefatory clause, the purpose of it, and then coupled with the individual right and the atmosphere that right was coming out of, where they just finished fighting a revolution and just got done dealing with a monarch who took a dim view of us, colonial rabble having guns. It's a real right, and it's something that I'm very serious about.
Thank you, Mr. Coulson. Mr. Hart, our Second Amendment rights, do we need to protect them more or less?
I think we need to do everything we can to protect our Second Amendment rights. I firmly believe that everybody has the right to bear arms and keep arms in their house. I have a lot of the same weapons that Mr. Coulson has. But at the end of the day, we talk about gun regulations and more gun control laws. Once again, you don't want to commit to voting yes or no on a bill without seeing that piece of legislation in that bill. But I don't see where any of the current gun laws is stopping the gun violence. We need to, I don't know what the answer is, but we need to protect our rights, but we don't need to take the rights away from law-abiding citizens to protect ourselves. Because gun violence is on the rise in this country, and it's not law-abiding citizens that are committing crimes. It's criminals, and they're not going to follow any law that we pass. So I do think that we need to be vigilant, and we need to constantly be aware and protect everybody's right to bear arms. I've got an A rating with the NRA, and I'm endorsed by the NRA, and that's just more evidence of my commitment to protecting the Second Amendment.
Mr. Coulson. Mr. Coulson, anything further on Amendment 2?
No, I was talking to a prosecutor today. I'm going to play a recording now. But we were just miserable because we got this on case together where a bunch of 18-year-old kids get a hold of a gun, you know, and stupid, terrible stuff happens. And the problem is that you can't infringe on the rights of law-abiding people who are acting responsibly, because very often what we're seeing is these guns are coming out of the trunks of cars, convicted felons have them, and so it's not there.
Mr. Hart?
I'll stand on my...
Gentlemen, I'll tell you this, y'all got all them guns, I'll call before I come out. I'll call twice. Representative Hart, thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Councilor Coulson, thank you so very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, your candidates for the 78 representative seats.